Welcome back to the deep dive. Usually when we start these conversations, we're looking at things that are designed to make your life better.
Right.
We talk about productivity hacks or the history of coffee or, how to negotiate a raise. We talk about climbing ladders. But today we're taking a slightly different path. We are walking up the steps of the ivory tower.
The ivory tower. It's such a distinct image, isn't it?
It really is. It evokes this sense of higher learning, pure intellect, the quiet hum of scientific breakthrough. You imagine these grand libraries with that old paper smell and labs where the next Nobel Prize is just bubbling away in a beaker. It's supposed to be a sanctuary.
That is the marketing brochure version, certainly.
Yeah.
But the stack of sources we've pulled for today, well, it completely dismantles that image. It strips the paint right off the walls.
It really does. But based on the reporting we have here, and we're talking about a massive stack ranging from 2015 all the way up to February of 2026.
Literally just weeks ago.
Exactly. And it includes high court judgments, quantitative studies, reports on student suicides, and chaotic street protests. And the reality we see in these sources is less ivory tower and more of a fortress that, for a lot of the people inside it, has basically become a prison.
It's a heavy stack today. And I think it's important to frame this correctly for everyone listening. We are looking at a reality that is often hidden behind the massive prestige of acronyms.
Right, the big names.
Yeah. We hear IIT, JNU, Central Universities, and we immediately think of excellence. We think of the CEOs of Silicon Valley. We think of global rankings.
We think of success stories.
We do. But the sources we're diving into today reveal a systemic rot within Indian higher education institutions, or HEIs. And it's not a rot that just affects grades or research output.
No, and to be clear right up front, because I really want to warn you if you're listening, this isn't just about exam stress. We aren't talking about burnout in the corporate sense. We are talking about life and death.
There's a specific term that has started appearing in the discourse, actually. It's used by activists and professors, like N. Sukumar. They have stopped using the word suicide.
What are they calling it?
They're calling these deaths institutional murders.
Wow. Institutional murder. That is a chilling distinction. It completely shifts the agency.
It does.
It implies that the structure itself is pulling the trigger.
Precisely. The argument they make is that suicide is an individual act of despair. But when you create an environment so hostile, so isolating, and so devoid of any legal recourse that a student feels their absolute only option is to end their life, the institution bears culpability.
Because the institution built the trap.
Exactly. They built the trap.
Okay, so let's set the scope for today's deep dive. We are doing a comprehensive autopsy of the mental health crisis in Indian academia. We're peeling back the layers on three intersecting vectors here: systemic bullying, deep-rooted caste discrimination, and rampant sexual harassment.
And like you mentioned, the timeline is wide. We're pulling case studies from a decade ago to show the deep roots of this, and we're looking at government regulations and violent protests from early 2026 to show how this is boiling over right now.
So what's our mission today? What are we actually trying to figure out here? Because this topic just seems huge.
The mission is to unpack the power dynamic. If you want to understand why these tragedies keep happening, you have to look at the smallest unit of power in academia, and that is the relationship between a research scholar, so a PhD student, and their supervisor.
Okay.
We need to understand why this specific relationship in India is uniquely broken, and what happens when you throw highly explosive elements like caste and gender into that already volatile mix.
All right, let's unpack that. Let's start with that relationship. The guide, the supervisor. In the West, or even in a corporate setting, a supervisor is a mentor, or maybe a boss. You have HR, you have clear deliverables. But in the sources we have, specifically a 2026 report from the federal and a 2022 research paper on toxic supervision, it sounds entirely different.
It is fundamentally different. The sources don't describe a professional mentorship at all. They describe a feudal lord.
A feudal lord? I mean,
Well,
that seems a bit dramatic. We're talking about science labs, not medieval fiefdoms.
It sounds dramatic until you look at the mechanics of the PhD structure. You have to understand the legal limbo a scholar lives in over there. As a PhD candidate, you are not an employee.
Right.
You don't have labor rights. You can't form a union in the traditional sense. You don't have set working hours protected by national law.
But you weren't really a student in the classroom sense either, right? You weren't just sitting in a lecture hall taking notes.
No, you are producing value. You're the one doing the actual research. But you are operating in a zone where one single person, your supervisor, holds the keys to your entire existence.
How total is this control? Walk
Oh,
us
yeah.
through the actual leverage points they have.
It is absolute. First, the supervisor decides your research topic. That's your entire career trajectory right there. Second, and this is huge, they approve your monthly fellowship,
So
the money. In many institutions, the guide has to physically sign a monthly attendance or progress report for your funds to be released.
so they control whether you get paid that month. That's a direct financial stranglehold.
It gets tighter than that. They decide when you can attend a conference to network. They decide when you are supposedly ready to publish a paper. And ultimately, they are the ones who sign off on your thesis submission.
And if they don't sign?
If they don't sign, you don't get the degree. You could be 5 years in. You could have written the code, run the experiments, drafted all the chapters. And if that one person says, I'm not satisfied or I'm not ready to let you go, you leave with nothing.
That creates a massive bottleneck. And in literally any system where there is a bottleneck of that magnitude controlled by one individual with zero checks and balances, you are essentially just inviting abuse of power.
Exactly. The 2022 paper refers to this as a heavily skewed power dynamic. And because the dependency is so high, it normalizes behavior that would be completely illegal or at least actionable in any normal workplace.
We're talking about unpaid labor here, right? But I want to be really specific because I think listeners might hear unpaid labor and imagine staying late to finish a PowerPoint deck.
Right. They think of overtime. But no, we are talking about personal servitude. The reports are absolutely filled with accounts of scholars being treated effectively like domestic help.
Give us the details. What are these brilliant minds, these people who crack some of the toughest entrance exams in the world? What are they being asked to do?
The examples are shocking. Scholars are reportedly made to fetch groceries.
For the lab?
No, for the professor's house.
Oh.
They are sent to pick up the professor's children from school. They have to escort the professor's relatives to hospitals or wait at railway stations for hours to receive family members visiting from out of town.
That is wild. You join an IIT, you pass the gate exam, you are there to perhaps invent the next semiconductor or solve a complex chemical equation, and you end up being a glorified chauffeur.
It's incredibly humiliating. It strips away your identity as a researcher and reduces you to a servant. And the implicit threat is always hanging right there in the air. Do this, or I won't sign your papers.
And what if you refuse? What if you just say, sir, I'm here to do physics, not your grocery shopping?
That is where the toxic supervision really bears its teeth. The report mentions a specific case of a scholar at IIT Kanpur. This is a heartbreaking example of just how petty the power can be. His friend was supposed to submit his thesis. He had done the work. He was ready. But the supervisor postponed the submission by a whole semester.
Why? Was the data flawed? Was the writing bad?
No, the reason given was that the supervisor wasn't in the mood.
Not in the mood.
That was the exact quote. I am not in the mood.
That is 6 months of a young person's life, 6 months of lost income, 6 months of career delay, just because someone wasn't emotionally ready to sign a piece of paper.
It highlights the total lack of accountability. There are no concrete metrics. Everything is vague and subjective. I mean, if a CEO told a board, I didn't launch the product because I wasn't in the mood, they would be fired on the spot.
Instantly.
But in academia, it's just Tuesday. And this is particularly brutal in the science streams, what they call the lab culture.
Yeah, I saw the data point about the hours, 16-hour days.
Yes. The expectation in many top labs is that you are physically present for 16 hours a day. If you aren't there, your attendance is cut. And here is the real kicker. This continues even during unpaid extension periods.
Wait, explain that. Unpaid extension.
So government fellowships usually last for 5 years. But PhDs in India often take 6 or 7 years to complete because of these delays. So for those last 2 years, you're earning 0 rupees. You are struggling to survive. But you are still expected to clock in 16 hours a day of labor for the supervisor to somehow earn that final signature.
That sounds like modern slavery with extra steps.
It's basically indentured servitude. And the surveillance they use to enforce this is getting much darker. I was reading this preprint from October 2025 on ResearchGate about academic bullying, and it mentioned something called IMEI surveillance.
I flagged that too when I was reading through. It sounded like something out of a spy novel or some dystopian sci-fi movie. Explain how this works in a university setting.
Yeah, this October 2025 paper highlights how bullying has evolved with technology. It's not just a professor shouting in the lab anymore. Supervisors or senior bullies are allegedly hacking phones using IMEI details,
How are they even doing that? Through the university Wi-Fi.
likely through network administration privileges or by demanding device registration for campus security purposes. And once they have that access, the report claims they are obtaining financial privacy details, like PAN numbers and bank account statements.
Wait, pause right there. Why on earth would a university supervisor need a student's personal bank statement? What is the utility of that?
Think about the power dynamic again. It's all about leverage. If you know exactly how much money a student has or doesn't have, you know their breaking point.
Oh, wow.
You know if they can afford to quit. You know if they are desperate. If you hack in and see they have zero savings, you know you can push them harder, make them work those unpaid hours because they literally cannot afford to walk away.
That is incredibly predatory. That's weaponizing poverty.
It is. And the impact isn't just isolated to the student. This preprint documents cases where the stress spilled over to the families. There are actually documented cases of parental deaths caused by the stress of their children's academic failure and harassment.
So the parents are watching their child crumble under this intense pressure. The financial burden is mounting. The shame of this impending failure is looming. And the stress actually kills the parents.
Yes, it destroys entire families. When we talk about institutional murder, we're usually just talking about the student, but the collateral damage is much wider. The blast radius of this toxicity hits everyone the student loves.
It's suffocating just hearing about it, but I think we need to zoom in. We've talked about the what, the servitude, the surveillance, the mood swings. We need to see the how.
Right.
We have a case study here from St. Stephen's College at Delhi University. This is from a Dalio report in 2015, so a bit older, but the sources say it is a perfect anatomy of how harassment happens.
Yes, the St. Stephen's case is critical because it creates a blueprint. It illustrates the modus operandi step by step. Even though it's from 2015, the pattern is identical to what we see happening today.
Introduce us to the people involved in this tragedy.
So we have Sonam. That's a pseudonym used in the reports to protect her identity. She was a research scholar in chemistry. And the antagonist here is her supervisor, Dr. Satish Kumar. Now, there's a really important detail regarding the power dynamic here. Dr. Kumar wasn't just a chemistry professor, he was also the college bursar.
For those who don't know university admin titles, the bursar is the money man, right?
Exactly. He controls the finances. He controls the stipends. Remember that financial leverage we just talked about? He had it officially. He signed the checks for the college.
So how did the harassment start in this case? Was it immediate?
It really is immediate. It started with what effectively acts as grooming or testing boundaries, physical touching in the lab, brushing past her, invading personal space. Then it moved to verbal harassment, comments on her appearance. He told her, "You look healthy in that sari." He started asking intrusive questions about her private life.
You look healthy. That's such a loaded, creepy way to compliment someone in a professional setting.
It is. It's designed to make you uncomfortable, but it's just ambiguous enough that if you complain, he can say, "Oh, I was just being nice. You're overreacting."
Yeah.
But then the ambiguity completely vanished. He made a comment asking about the gap between her thighs.
God, there is no ambiguity there at all.
None. That is sexual harassment, plain and simple.
Yeah.
But what happened next is where it moves from harassment to a criminal threat.
The power dynamic became a weapon.
It did. He explicitly threatened her physical safety. He said, "If you come to the lab wearing a yellow sari, I will pour sulfuric acid on you."
Pour sulfuric acid. That is a death threat. That is a threat of grievous bodily harm, of permanent disfigurement.
And remember where they are. They are in a chemistry lab. That acid is sitting right there on the bench. It's not a metaphorical threat like, "Oh, I'll destroy your career." It's a literal physical threat using the tools of their trade. It's terrifyingly plausible.
And then came the quid pro quo.
Yes. He put it plainly. He said he would give her the degree, but asked what he would get in return. He actually said, "Only your husband will get everything."
Implying he wanted sexual access in exchange for the PhD.
Correct. Why should your husband be the only one to enjoy you? That was the clear implication. But here is the tragedy of the Indian system, and why this specific case is so important for our deep dive today. The harassment by the individual, Dr. Kumar, is only chapter 1. Chapter 2 is the institutional response.
Right, because Sonam did the right thing. She didn't stay silent.
She complained. She went to the principal, Valsan Thumpo. Now, St. Stephen's is one of the most prestigious colleges in India. You expect a certain standard of ethics from the top.
So did he fire the guy? Did he call the police immediately?
No. According to the reports and Sonam's own testimony, the principal went into damage control mode. He allegedly pressured Sonam to withdraw the complaint. He told her this should not be treated as sexual harassment, but as an academic problem.
Why reframe it? Just to save the college's reputation.
Exactly. To protect the good name of St. Stephen's, it's the classic old boys club mentality. He tried to frame a criminal act and acid threat as a dispute between a student and a teacher about research methods. He wanted to handle it in-house, and when she refused to back down, when she insisted on her legal rights.
The retaliation.
Yes, the bursar Dr. Kumar used his other lever. He stopped her monthly stipend of 18,000 rupees.
So she is being sexually harassed, threatened with acid, gaslit by the principal of the college, and now she's being starved out financially.
That is the 3 chapters of harassment in academia. Chapter 1, the act itself. Chapter 2, academic retaliations, stopping the work or stopping the money. Chapter 3, institutional pressure to silence the victim. It is a playbook. And it works because the institution cares more about its image than the safety of its students.
And this playbook seems to work even more effectively, or perhaps more brutally, when the student comes from a marginalized background. Which brings us to the next and perhaps most volatile section of our deep dive, systemic casteism.
This is the heavy silence in the room. We often like to think of science and academia as caste blind, that it's only about merit. We tell ourselves the lab doesn't care who you are, only what you discover. Equations don't have a caste, but the data screams otherwise.
We mentioned the term institutional murder earlier. This term is largely advocated by activists and professors like N. Sukumar, specifically to describe the deaths of Dalit and Adivasi students. It's not used as much for general academic stress, it's used for systemic exclusion.
Yes, we have to look at the recent tragedies. Varan Sanjay Nurkar at IIT Delhi in February 2024. Darshan Solanki at IIT Bombay in February 2023. These aren't just sad, isolated anecdotes. They are part of a massive pattern. When you look at the names, the backgrounds, a horrifying consistency emerges.
What defines this pattern? Is it just bullying, or is it something much more specific to their identity?
It's isolation and exclusion. The sources from FII Media and the Federal describe how students from SC, ST, and OBC backgrounds, scheduled caste, scheduled tribe, and other backward class, enter these elite spaces and just hit a brick wall.
Let's look at the faculty numbers to understand that wall, because this stat blew my mind. A 2019 revelation showed that 95% of faculty positions in IITs were held by Savarna, or upper caste backgrounds.
95%. Let that sink in. That leaves only 5% for SC, ST, and OBC categories combined. Think about what that means for a student. If you're a Dalit student walking into an IIT, the chances of seeing a professor who looks like you, who comes from your background, who understands your lived experience, are statistically near zero.
You are entering a space that is overwhelmingly demographically not yours. You are essentially a guest in someone else's house.
Exactly, and often an unwanted guest. This lack of representation isn't just an optical issue, it translates directly into dropout rates. Between 2018 and 2023, nearly 20,000 students from marginalized categories dropped out of central universities, IITs, and IIMs.
20,000.
20,000. That's a small city of intellectuals.
Yeah.
20,000 dreams ended.
And we need to be really clear here for the listeners. It's not because they aren't smart enough. They passed the exact same grueling entrance exams. They earned their seats.
No, absolutely not. It's because the environment rejects them. The sources highlight that in 2023, 6 entire departments at IIT Delhi rejected OBC PhD candidates entirely.
Yeah.
Not one single candidate was deemed meritorious enough.
Well, let's talk about that word, merit. It gets thrown around a lot in these debates. We can't lower standards, people say.
Merit is weaponized. The merit argument is often used to disguise blatant discrimination. Students are segregated based on their entrance rankings. If you came in via a reserved seat, you are marked. You are seen as a quota student, regardless of your actual performance in the lab. And this segregation gets physical. At IIT Bombay, there were major allegations of separate dining spaces.
Separate dining spaces, like segregation in the 21st century.
Segregation based on vegetarianism.
No.
Now, for international listeners, this might just sound like a dietary choice or a lifestyle preference. But in the Indian context, vegetarianism is often a proxy for caste purity, specifically Brahminical purity. So by creating vegetarian-only spaces and strictly enforcing them, you are effectively creating upper caste-only spaces where the smell of meat, which is associated with lower castes, is not allowed.
So you can't even eat your lunch in peace without being reminded of your place in the hierarchy.
Exactly. It creates a daily grinding humiliation. But what happens if you try to be politically active? If you try to fight back against this structure?
Then the system crushes you. We have the case of Nizar Mohammed Mohideen at JNU. This is from the Federal. Tell us about Nassar.
Nazar was a PhD student at JNU, which is widely known for being a very politically active campus. He was physically attacked by members of a student political group, the ABVP. And just to be clear, we are reporting on the facts of the case here as outlined in the sources. Now, in a normal world, if a student is assaulted on campus, the university protects the victim.
Right. You call security, you ban the attackers. It's a basic duty of care.
Instead, his supervisor labeled him the victim, a security threat.
The guy who got beaten up was labeled the threat.
Yes, because he was involved in the altercation, he was deemed a problem. And because he was labeled a threat, the supervisor withheld his stipend and denied him access to the lab, effectively ending his research. The message was, you are trouble, so you don't get to work.
Did he fight it?
He did. He went to the high court, and he won. The court ruled in his favor, recognizing the injustice of the situation. But, and this is the truly heartbreaking part, despite the court win, the environment at the university was so toxic, so hostile, that he had to leave the country to continue his studies.
He had to leave India entirely.
He couldn't stay. He was marked by the system.
That is a brain drain of the absolute worst kind. We usually talk about brain drain being about better salaries in the US or Europe, but here we are actively driving top-tier talent out because we refuse to protect them physically and emotionally at home.
And this brings us to the legal battleground, because the government is trying to regulate this. They know it's a massive problem. But the backlash is complicated and violent.
You're talking about the recent events from January 2026, the UGC equity regulations. This is really the breaking news in our timeline today.
Yes. In January 2026, the University Grants Commission, or UGC, released new regulations. They mandated equity committees in all higher education institutions.
And what was the mandate? What were these committees actually supposed to do?
The mandate was about representation. These committees had to have mandatory representation from OBC, SC, and ST communities. The idea was simple. If a marginalized student complains about caste discrimination, there should be someone on the committee who understands what caste discrimination actually looks like in practice. It directly addresses that 95% faculty imbalance we talked about earlier.
That sounds incredibly sensible. If I'm a student claiming bias, I want a jury of my peers, or at least a jury that comprehends the crime. But this triggered massive protests.
Huge protests, especially in Uttar Pradesh. We saw it in Lucknow, Prayagraj, Varanasi. But the protesters weren't the marginalized students asking for rights.
Who were they?
It was largely general category students in groups like the Savarna Army. And again, we were just reporting the events from the sources here.
The Savarna Army? That sounds militant.
It is a mobilized group representing upper caste interests. They called these new regulations a black law. They argued it was anti-Brahmin. Their core argument was that by mandating representation for marginalized groups, the law inherently discriminates against general category students. They argued that these committees would be weaponized to file false complaints against upper caste professors.
And the protests were dramatic. This wasn't just holding a few placards outside the dean's office.
No, it was visceral. Students were shaving their heads in Kanpur, which is a traditional Hindu sign of mourning or extreme protest. In Kaushambi, they were writing letters to the prime minister in blood.
In blood. That is intense. That is highly emotional.
It shows the deep volatility of the caste conversation in India. Any attempt to level the playing field, even slightly with a committee, is seen by the dominant group as an existential attack on them. The sentiment is, you are taking our space. You are attacking our professors.
And what did the Supreme Court do? Did they back the UGC?
On January 29, 2026, the Supreme Court stayed the regulations. They put a hard pause on it. They called the regulations vague and capable of misuse. So they sent the whole issue back to the drawing board.
So we are back to square one. The regulations are on hold. The protesting groups won that round.
Effectively, yes. The status quo held, and while the regulations are on hold, the cases just keep coming. And speaking of legal battles, we have to talk about a judgment from the Madras High Court from December 2024. It involves a bottle of whitener.
Ah, yes, the Whitener case. This judgment reads like a legal thriller, but a really, really frustrating one.
It highlights the absolute absurdity of the lengths supervisors will go to. This was a battle between a research scholar and her guide in Tamil Nadu.
Set the scene for us. What happened?
The dispute started, as they so often do, over attendance. The scholar claimed she was present in the lab working. The supervisor claimed she wasn't. But the evidence. When the physical attendance register was produced, it showed that the supervisor had physically used correction fluid whitener to erase her signature from the register.
He erased her signature. That sounds like tampering with evidence, like literally scrubbing her out of existence on paper.
That was the allegation. He physically removed the proof of her work. But the scholar fired back with much more serious charges than just an attendance dispute. She alleged he demanded a bribe of 2 lakh rupees. She alleged he demanded sexual favors. And she alleged he physically touched her hands under the guise of palmistry.
Palmistry, like, let me read your fortune while I harass you.
It's a classic grooming tactic, breaking the physical barrier under a non-sexual, mystical pretext to see if the victim resists. Oh, I'm just looking at your lifeline. It's insidious.
So what did the Internal Complaints Committee, the ICC, say? Did they believe her?
The ICC actually found 50% of the charges proved. They found enough hard evidence to say, yes, this man is guilty. Based on that, the university syndicate decided to discharge the professor, basically compulsory retirement. They fired him.
Good. Finally, some accountability. The system actually worked for once.
But wait, the professor went to the High Court, and the single judge set aside the penalty.
Why? If the charges were proved. If the ICC, the official body, said he did it.
Procedural lapses. There was a delay in filing the complaint. There was a lack of cross-examination. But, and this is the legal nuance that really stings, the professor argued that the ICC composition was wrong. The UGC regulations say students should be on the committee if the victim is a student.
That makes perfect sense. Peer representation, we just talked about that with the equity regulations.
The professor argued it was humiliating for a senior professor to be judged by students. He argued that his status meant he shouldn't have to answer to a PhD scholar on a disciplinary committee.
Wow. So his ego, his status, was an actual legal argument. I am too important to be judged by you.
And it worked. The court focused heavily on the technicalities. The verdict was that the allegations weren't proved in the manner known to law. The penalty was scrapped. The takeaway here is chilling. Even when you have a mechanism, even when the university actually fires the guy, the legal system's obsession with procedure and academic hierarchy often protects the powerful.
It feels like the system is explicitly designed to find a loophole for the professor, while the student is just left holding the trauma. And speaking of trauma, we need to look at the sheer scale of this for women. We have a study here from the International Journal of Indian Psychology from January 2025.
This moves us from anecdotes to the stark, quantitative reality. They surveyed 200 female university students, and the numbers are staggering.
Lay them on us.
80% reported facing verbal harassment, offensive jokes, sexual remarks, comments on their body.
80%. That is basically everyone. If you are a woman in a university, you have experienced this.
It's the baseline experience. 90% reported physical harassment, unwanted touching.
90%. That is terrifying. That means walking through a campus as a woman is almost guaranteed to involve a physical violation.
And 18% reported sexual coercion, manipulation, blackmail, the quid pro quo we talked about with Sonam, sleep with me or fail. Nearly 1 in 5 women.
There's a really specific detail in the study about the word darling.
Yes. 50% of respondents reported being addressed with unwelcome terms like darling by professors or seniors.
It sounds small, right? Compared to acid threats or demanding a 2 lakh bribe, some might say, oh, it's just a term of endearment. But it's insidious.
It is deeply insidious. It erodes professional boundaries. It infantilizes women. It reminds them that they are seen as objects of affection or desire, not as intellectuals. It reinforces that feudal lord dynamic. You are here for my pleasure, not your career. You are not doctor, you are darling.
And this leads to what the October 2025 ResearchGate paper calls the leaky pipeline.
This is a crucial concept for the macro picture. In India, women enter PG and doctoral levels at almost parity with men. They are there. They want to be scientists. But if you look at the top department heads, deans, directors, they completely disappear.
They leak out of the system.
They don't just leak. They are pushed. It is not a lack of talent or ambition. It is a survival mechanism. If the environment is 90% physically unsafe, if you are being called darling and asked for bribes, you leave to survive. You go to industry, or you leave the workforce entirely, or you go abroad.
And the source connects this directly to the Sustainable Development Goals, the SDGs.
Right. SDG 5 is gender equality. SDG 16 is peace and justice. The argument is that unsafe campuses are literally unsustainable. You cannot build a developed modern nation if half your intellectual workforce is busy dodging harassment instead of doing actual research. It's a massive economic loss as much as it is a human rights violation.
So we have painted a pretty bleak picture today. Feudal lords, caste apartheid, rampant harassment, legal loopholes, and blood-written protests. Is there any hope in these sources? Do they suggest any real solutions?
They do. And importantly, there are structural solutions. We aren't just saying professors should be nicer. We are looking at changing the core mechanics of the system.
One idea is the sandwich PhD. This sounds delicious, but I assume it's not about food.
No, unfortunately not. It's a model used in Nordic countries, and it's increasingly discussed in Indian policy circles. The idea is that a student splits their time in different institutions. You have a co-supervisor or a verified external guide from an entirely different university or an industry lab.
So you aren't stuck with just one feudal lord.
Exactly. It breaks the monopoly. If supervisor A turns out to be toxic, you're already embedded with supervisor B at another location. You have a built-in escape hatch. It dilutes the power of that single signature. The student isn't trapped on one isolated island.
That makes so much sense. Decentralize the power. What about AI? There was a mention of AI coaches in the 2025 preprint.
This is a novel suggestion, very forward-looking. The idea is to use AI to help students select supervisors based on hard data, not just gossip or who has the biggest lab.
How would that actually work in practice?
Currently, students pick supervisors based on word of mouth or political pressure. Oh, he's famous. Go work for him. An AI mediator could match research interests? Sure. But more importantly, it tracks the supervisor's historical data. This supervisor has a 50% dropout rate. Flagged. This supervisor has 0 publications with female co-authors over 10 years. Flagged.
Data-driven matchmaking. I like it. It removes the opacity. If the data says everyone quits this lab, the AI warns you away before you sign 5 years of your life away.
Exactly. Transparency is the antidote to toxicity. And what about the degree itself? The other major structural solution is publication-based degrees.
Explain that one.
Currently, you need your supervisor's subjective approval to submit your thesis. The proposal is to move away from the supervisor's signature being the ultimate metric. If you have successfully published 3 papers in high-impact, peer-reviewed journals, that should be enough to prove your merit. You shouldn't need your supervisor to sign a permission slip saying, "I'm in the mood now." The global scientific industry validates you, not the local feudal lord.
Objective metrics over subjective whims. It treats the student like a professional researcher rather than a child.
And finally, the big stick, blacklisting.
This was demanded by 165 scientists in a letter to the Citizen back in 2018.
Yes. They demanded that sexual misconduct or severe bullying should lead to immediate blacklisting from government funding. If you harass a student, the government cuts your grant money entirely. You can't serve on scientific committees. You can't win national awards. You can't be given the title of distinguished professor.
Hit them where it hurts. The prestige and the wallet.
Because currently, perpetrators often just move. Like the bursar in the St. Stephen's case. They often retain power or just shuffle to a different admin role in the same college. Or like the professor in the Whitener case, they get off on a procedural technicality and go right back to work. Blacklisting would end their careers effectively. It says you are unsafe to be around students, so you do not get our taxpayer money.
So what does this all mean? We have looked at the horror stories, the data, the protests, and the potential fixes.
It means we are at a breaking point. We have a feudal system operating inside a modern democracy. Supervisors hold godlike power, insulated by caste privilege and institutional apathy. And the cost is not just academic, it is measured in actual human lives.
That is the so what for you listening. Why should you care about university regulations? Because science and innovation require freedom. They require a baseline of safety. If the brightest minds in India, the ones who could cure cancer or solve the energy crisis or build the next big AI, are busy fetching groceries, dodging palmistry, or fighting off severe depression because their supervisor isn't in the mood, then the entire nation's intellectual output is being strangled.
We are killing our own future. We're crushing the very people we need to build it.
I want to leave you with a provocative thought based on the protests we discussed earlier. In January 2026, we saw massive protests, head shaving, and letters written in blood against equity regulations. We saw people fighting tooth and nail against representation.
But we rarely, if ever, see that level of mobilization when a student dies.
Exactly. In a system where students shaving their heads to protest against equity gets more national attention than students dying by suicide, is the Indian academic system designed to educate? Or is it designed to preserve the status quo?
That is the ultimate question. Is it a tower of learning or a fortress of privilege?
Something for you to mull over. If you want to dig deeper, look up the UGC Equity Regulations 2026 or read the full investigative story of the St. Stephen's case. The sources are out there. Thanks for listening to The Deep Dive.
Stay curious and stay safe.